listening. A very important experience that all of us need to engage in a variety of different ways. Let us pray. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I can tell you that over the last 2 weeks since I've arrived, I have been engaged in a great deal of listening. It's all been good, don't worry. It's been refreshing, it's been enlightening, it's also been a learning experience. Because I've learned some things. Things that will be important, I think, for us as we take some of the next beginning steps in this intentional interim ministry time. So hence the rationale for me choosing a sermon title, Holy Listening. And I've chosen this passage in the Gospel that I can tell you I've only preached on 3 times in my entire ministry, because for some of us preachers, this particular passage can be politically loaded depending on how you deal with it. But I'm wanting to take a different tact. It was just a couple of years ago now that the renowned author and editor Thomas Friedman, who I love when he writes, had a column on the op-ed page of the New York Times called The Taxi Driver. You might remember it if you read. He told of being driven by a cab from the Charles de Gaulle Airport to Paris. During that 1-hour trip, he and the driver had done 6 things during that time. The driver had driven the cab. He had talked on his cell phone. He had watched a video which was a little nerve-wracking. Whereas Thomas Friedman himself was, while he was writing, working on the column he was writing in his laptop, he was listening to something on his iPad, and he said this: "There is only one thing that we never did in that whole ride. Talk to each other." One person has stated that the disease of the internet and social media age is a continuous, partial attention span. Perhaps it's not only the disease of the internet age, perhaps it has always been with us, and just the causes of our inattention have been altered. Is it possible, I wondered this past week, that this story of the 2 sisters offers us an ongoing plea from the Christ to focus on Him, to give Him some prime time in our lives, some full attention, just as we do with our own close friends in life. Now, over the years, there have been countless arguments about this story in Luke. Normally, in the ancient world, all of the adult women would have shared in the responsibility for preparing a meal, but for some reason, Mary chooses to opt out. Instead, she does what? She sits quietly at the feet of Jesus, like a student or a disciple would, and listens intently to what he has to say. And Martha is ticked off about the fair division of the household chores and directs this at Jesus. And what he does, in fact, is what has bothered people over time. He gently scolds Martha right back and takes Mary's side. Mary has need of only one thing, the better part, he says. Now, I could go on about the injustice of one doing something and the other not, but I want to set what's going on within a different setting this morning, which is this. The better part that Mary has chosen relates to the quality of attention she is bringing to her task. Martha, on the other hand, is worried and distracted by many things. So Jesus then adds, there is only one thing. And simply put, Mary listens deeply. Mary was fully present. It seems that this capacity to focus attention on one thing has been part of the spiritual formation of the disciples in all of the major religions of our world. From Buddhism to Hinduism, Judaism, and Christianity. Sometimes it's referred to as single-mindedness. Some traditions call it mindful attention. That is, it is the capacity to be fully present to whatever it is one is doing. Whether it is a domestic chore, or a formal meditation, or even playing golf, without the distraction of the chattering monkey mind we can have. We only have one life, Jesus is saying, and this mind seems to swing from one thought, one image, one worry to another, like a monkey swinging from branch to branch. And we have learned to believe that this distracted mind is in fact who we are. But every religious teacher assures us that this is in fact not the case. This is a counterfeit mind. The deeper, authentic mind is able to witness the monkey mind. To live out of the authentic mind is to be connected to the divine mind or the Christ consciousness. This is the better part that Mary chose. Martha believed that her problem was that she had to do all of the work while Mary was just goofing off. But the problem was more than than just bringing her counterfeit mind to the task. She was worried and she was distracted. She wasn't even in her task. Now, Brother Lawrence from the Christian tradition wrote that great spiritual classic called Practicing the Presence of God, in which he describes cleaning the kitchen as a way of being fully present to the Holy One. It's a few years ago now. I recall attending a conference of clergy who represented various traditions across the ecumenical spectrum. And in preparation for that, we were asked to name what we considered the major obstacles to our church members' growth as disciples. Without a close second, church members' busyness was easily agreed upon by clergy as the number one problem keeping them from growing spiritually. Entertainment and busyness are two primary ways we are diverted and distracted in life. We become too busy to notice or in fact to care about anything beyond our own daily routines. I'll share with you this is also true of clergy. It's a common phrase that's heard among all of us. Oh, I'm busy. Eugene Peterson said that although we all go through periods when we're busier than at other times, overall our lives should have integrity about them, integrated in such a way that we are not running frenetically all the time. We are too busy, he says, because we are vain. We want to be important. We want to be significant. And the crowded schedule and the heavy demands on my time are proof to others that I am important. We live in a society that says busyness is proof of importance, so we do the same. Our minds are working overtime on the next deal, the next solution, the next trip, the next workshop, or how can we make the church bigger and better, and on and on and on. I had one former parishioner of mine who told me that what she likes best about coming to weekly worship on Sunday is it pulls her away from the world to a quiet place of stillness. And overall, the best part of any worship service for her was when there was silence. Absolute time to be still. She referred to it for her as a time of holy listening. I like that. I think that is what Mary may have been about in this story, being present to the Holy One. You see, when we are operating from our counterfeit mind, it is almost impossible to listen to anything but the chattering around us. This chattering then becomes a source of distraction. It typically can take the form of what we understand to be three overbearing voices. There is the voice of fear. We don't know what Martha was worried about, but all worry, in fact, is a form of fear. And then there is the voice of cynicism, which protects our hearts from being broken, but robs us of having any joy. And then there's the voice of judgment that tells us that our ideas, our visions, or the hopes that we have are just plain silly, unrealistic, simple and bad. These are the distracting voices that keep us from attending to our deeper self and our deep calling in the Christ figure. They too are generated by what is called the counterfeit mind. Freed of distractions of the counterfeit mind, Mary chose to be the better part. She was free to listen to Jesus. One of the signs that we're learning to shift from the distracted mind to the Christ mind is our capacity to listen deeply. There are at least 4 levels of listening. The first is simply understood to be known as downloading. Whatever is being said, you already know, or you think you do. And this is the way a lot of husbands and wives listen to each other. This is listening from an absolutely distracted mind. The second is known as scientific listening. At this level, you are actually open to receiving some new data. You're not just listening to reconfirm your own interpretations of reality, but here you have quieted the counterfeit mind enough to receive new information. Descending deeper, there is then empathetic listening, actually putting oneself in the shoes of another person or being and feeling what they are feeling. It's a listening from the open heart. Many couples in pre-marriage classes experience empathetic listening for the first time with each other. And finally, there is a deeper listening yet. This is a holy listening, the one thing Jesus was referring to in Mary's better way. This is a kind of listening that you hear from your inner ear. It's the capacity to listen for the future that stands in need of you in order to emerge in life. To listen at this level, I believe, is to have the mind of Christ. And when we're listening with the inner ear, everything we once thought was absolutely essential in life suddenly becomes background. And what was background? The generative source from which all futures emerge now becomes foreground. When Mary was listening to Jesus with total, undistracted focus, I believe that this is what she was listening for. The future that required her unique gifts and qualities in order to be born into her world. I wondered this past week, what if congregations, which are a collection of individuals, chose to listen deeply for what the holy future that they desire to emerge might take place? Like the visionary experiences some people have in life, you have to sit still and you have to listen to understand what it is you're looking for. So why would you and I do this? Because it's important. Because you are at a crossroad, and so am I, and the world as a species on this planet Earth. You see, we will need to reinvent what it means to be human, or we will not be fit for life. And we're at that point right now. There is a virtual groundswell of humans on the planet who are tapping into this authentic mind, this generative source from all which the futures emerge. We have reached a point when it is no longer enough to simply recreate what we've done in the past. As Christians, we need to reinvent completely what it means to be the church. It doesn't mean waiting around for some external God to do something about the mess that we find ourselves in. It means tapping into our own authentic selves as the place where the holy dwells, and offering a deep willingness to allow the future to emerge through us. God, you see, is already surging through you and me right here, right now. But like Martha, when we're distracted and worried, we can't feel any of that sacred flow or rhythm in life. When the voices of fear or judgment or cynicism are active, we can't hear the voice of the Spirit. There is one thing necessary for us as we enter the 21st century and continue to grow into it, and that is to listen to our authentic mind and heart to the authentic source of all being. For the last 300 years, we have been fascinated by our capacity to make things, to build things, to change things, and by power and wealth. It is not all being necessarily negative, but it has come at a terrible cost to the earth, her creatures. And 75% of human beings who have not participated in this explosion of creativity focused around acquisition. In the 21st century, this project is little more than a spiritual distraction. We need to declare it defunct and bankrupt, because it can no longer sustain our soul's interest nor the earth's capacity. You see, the emerging future requires that we focus our creativity not on acquisition, but on allocation. Allocating the fruits of our creativity to the repair of the planet, peace between nations, and a healing of our relationships with the poor, and the quality of our relationships with each other. How this future emerges within each one of us will be unique, quirky, distinctive, and hopefully fun. The vibrant, alive congregation, individually and collectively, sits at the feet of the Christ and listens for a new future that is coming into being through them. That's you. Holy listening requires of us to be open always in our lives to the deep source of life. Since I like poetry, I think the great poet Mary Oliver says it best in her poem entitled Today. It goes like this. Today, I'm flying low, and I'm not saying a word. I'm letting all the voodoos of ambition sleep. The world goes on as it must, the bees in the garden rumbling a little, the fish leaping, the gnats being eaten, and so forth. But I'm taking the day off, quiet as a feather. I hardly move, though really I'm traveling a terrific distance. Stillness, one of the doors into the temple. Jesus tells Martha that Mary had chosen the better part and that he will not take her away from her. He refused to take the future away from Mary. Neither will the Christ take it away from any of us. So you may want to ask yourselves on this Sunday morning, in what small ways the future is being born through you at this moment in time. May it be so for you. May it be so for me.